Good morning, everyone. My name is Ivana Cvetković-Bajrović, and on behalf of the National Endowment for Democracy and the Europe Program team, I would like to welcome you to this timely discussion on Bosnia and Herzegovina with a group of amazing guests that we have with us today. But before I say a few things about why we're here and who our speakers today are, I wanted to do something that is slightly unconventional in introductory remarks and begin by saying thanks to the people who made this event happen. Usually that's done at the end, and by that point, everybody's attention is elsewhere. But this group that I will now list very briefly really deserves great thanks. And I'll begin with Tanja Dramac-Giris, who will be also moderating our discussion today, our program officer covering, among other things, Bosnia and Herzegovina. She really took the lead in putting this event together, particularly as I was away. But she and the other members of the Southeast Europe team, Faith Bailey-Vuciterna and Katrina Selimi, are really instrumental in making our program happen on a daily basis, together with grants officers, Rena sitting in the back, our compliance officers, and many, many other people here at the Endowment who help to provide the support for the crucial work that our grantees are doing in places like Bosnia and Herzegovina. I wanted to thank our program assistant, Danny Anderson, for making things run smoothly, and Zach Evans and the rest of the public affairs team. Zach in particular for finding this fantastic photo that was put on the invite, because I was telling him is not only does Sarajevo probably look like this these days, but also it must feel so cold and dark in the post-election period when there's really no end and resolution in sight for the government coalition making. I want to thank our Senior Director for Europe, Roger Potocki, who helped us to conceptualize this event. And I'll thank our speakers in a minute, but I want to thank one person who's not here, but it is really thanks to her that we have this event, and that's another Tanja, or actually Tanja Domi, Professor Tanja Domi of the Herman Institute at Columbia University, who actually brought Darko and Srđan to the United States for an event that happened last year at Columbia University, on Bosnia and Herzegovina, discussion that happened there. I also wanted to thank her, even though she may not be watching, but I think that she deserves the thanks for making sure that the Balkans is discussed in New York, and that people like Srđan and Darko have an opportunity to speak there. So just a few words about the Endowment's work in the Balkans and in Bosnia in particular. We've been working in the Balkans since during the time of former Yugoslavia, since the late 80s. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, we supported in the besieged Sarajevo, for example, in the 1990s, the work of independent media such as Radio Zid, Daily Oslobođenje, and the crucial work in documenting the oral histories of those who lived in the besieged cities, such as the one done by Fama International, which later resulted in its seminal Siege of Sarajevo map. Today, Bosnia and Herzegovina is our top priority country for Southeast Europe, recognizing that the intractable difficulties that Bosnia is facing that are stifling its democratic progress, its stability, and maybe even peace, our board of directors awards about $1 million a year to roughly 24 organizations, independent media and civil society groups in the country that work on political accountability, civic education, promoting dialogue among youth, particularly in the difficult issues of the recent past, as well as independent media. Those are some of the areas in which we're focusing our work, and some of you may also know some of our grantees. Our grantees really span from not just in Sarajevo, but across cities like Tuzla, Prijedor, Banja Luka, Mostar. And we're supporting groups such as the online portal Touch.net in Mostar, the World Childhood Museum, award-winning World Childhood Museum, and many, many others. The work on political accountability, which we have two grantees here representing, is one of the more difficult ones. A lot of the difficulty stems from the document that was signed on this very day, December 14th of 1995 in Paris, when the Dayton Peace Accords was officially signed between the presence of three countries, Bosnia, Croatia, and Serbia. And the document that is designed to really create the peace for the country in many ways is creating difficulties that we're facing today. I'm not going to go into details of what those difficulties are. This is why we have this amazing group of speakers. And on that note, I'm going to just very briefly introduce them. You have their detailed bios in the programs that are on your chairs. I'm going to just say some of the more notable things. Darko Brkan is our longtime grantee, now has been a grantee for about 10 years. And we're particularly proud of two things. One is that he was a Reagan Fossell Fellow here. So he spent quite a bit of time here at the Endowment. He is really a known quantity here. But also that we were the first and remained the longest supporter of his organization's flagship project, the Truthometer, in Bosnia. And actually there's a third thing that we're incredibly proud of, particularly as of recently, and that is that the regional conference that promotes the use of technology for political accountability, POINT, which happens every May and has been happening every May in Sarajevo since 2012, is now also made its debut in Iraq. Darko and his team have been working with our grantees in the Middle East and North Africa to share some of their experiences on working on using technology for political accountability, and the product of that is an event that very successfully happened in August. Srđan Blagovčanin is the former executive director and now the chairman of the board of Transparency International. I have to say something about, a lot of you are probably familiar with Transparency International and Network, but I have to say that this chapter in Bosnia is something really special. When you say watchdog, this is really what you should mean. Watchdog of rule of law and integrity in Bosnia and Herzegovina is Transparency International. The organization has long time ago moved away from its original mandate of research and monitoring the perception of corruption to really, in some way, investigating cases of corruption. And for that brave work, the organization has faced tremendous pressure. You'll hear a little bit about that today, including the fact that they were forced to close their headquarters offices in Banja Luka in 2008. And so this great work remains very important. Also, an interesting and important fact for us is that Srđan was a Humphrey Fellow in the United States several years back. And then Gretchen Berker, a longtime friend, I would say a family member here. She's with USAID today, but she, for many, many years, was with IRI. She was crucial in setting up the women's program there, so that's something that we're particularly glad to point out. I've known Gretchen for a while now, and I just can't tell you how happy we are not to just have you here, but to have you in a position that you're currently holding. That is really, really amazing, and we really look forward to the rest of your mandate in this position and what great things we can do together. And on that note, I'm going to now turn over to Tanya, who will lead a fireside chat with our speakers. Please feel free to join us online by using the hashtag NEDEvents. The event is live streamed, and I will try to grab a few questions if they are posed online. If they're not posed here, Tanya will reserve at least half an hour at the end of the event for question and answers with you. But if there are any questions that our online audiences may have and are not being posed here, I'll try to pass those on. So please join me in welcoming our great group of speakers and enjoy the chat.
Thank you, Ivana, for your remarks. I'm sure that we will reflect on some of the things that you've already said. As Ivana said, my name is Tanya Dramas-Djerius, and I'm Program Officer on the Europe team covering the portfolio of Bosnia and Herzegovina. I would also like to greet our viewers online because we are being live streamed, as Ivana mentioned, but please allow me to welcome you one more time to the Endowment, and I'm really looking forward to this opportunity to moderate this discussion. Ivana already introduced our speakers, so I suggest that we dive right into discussion. However, I will please kindly ask you that you silence your cell phones so that we are uninterrupted for this discussion. I suggest we start with Darko, and since we had the elections in October in Bosnia, why don't you provide us with the general assessment and perhaps focus more on positive or negative developments out of those elections to get us started.
Okay. 1, 2, yeah. So let's go into the tough things immediately. Actually, we set up the whole event, and
it's the mic.
It's on.
Is it on?
I turned it on. 1, 2, 1, 2. It's working? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Great. So basically, the whole concept of this visit was to talk about the elections, because we foresaw that, it's going to be enough time after the elections, because they happened 2 months ago, to be able to talk about the results of the elections here. And we are halfway there actually. We still don't know whether the government will be formed at all or not, even 2 months after the elections, and that's probably the biggest negative point around the elections is that we knew that this might happen, and it actually happened. So the Constitutional Court has outlawed a couple of articles based on an appeal of the election law. So basically, at this point, we have no idea how the upper house of the Parliament of Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina and the state parliament will be formed, because we don't have a basis in the election law in order to form them, and we don't know who will and whether anybody will make a decision on forming of the parliament, which then leads to us not being able to form the government of Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, even though the state level government might still be formed only with House of Representatives. So that would be the most troubling thing, and we might end up with having kind of a very mixed government consisting of some parts from the new mandate after this election, some part of it from the old mandate from the previous elections, which then will be a very problematic government in order to govern. So that's probably the negative side. On the other hand, there will be new governments on the cantonal level in Bosnia. Some of them are already being formed. There will be the government of Republika Srpska. On the side of Republika Srpska, the thing that needs to be said is that the SNSD, the party of Milorad Dodik, has won the elections, and they will be together with partners forming the government of Republika Srpska. We can expect that to be formed by the end of the year. In the cantons, that's probably where the biggest change has happened, and we will definitely see in the next few days what happens on that. But there is a good chance that in a couple of cantons, the government will be formed by the opposition. I mean, in the previous mandate, which will then lead to either positive or negative effects. The positive effect will be that there might be new powers and new forces. There are some signs that, for instance, cantonal government of Sarajevo might be formed based on a programmatic document, and then at least there will be some accountability attached to the new government. On the other hand, it might definitely lead then to asymmetries in terms of the composition of the government and government coalitions along the vertical lines of the government in Bosnia. What will that lead to? We'll see. So basically, at this moment, it is crucial to wait out and see whether the government will be formed or not. If you look at it from a legal perspective, actually, there is no legal way to form the government at this moment in Bosnia, even though it might happen that the Central Election Commission, definitely outside of its mandate, decides on the formula of how to form the federal parliament, and then there's a chance of the government being formed. If that's not contested on the Constitutional Court, it might just survive the decision. But we'll have to sit out and wait, and then it opens up additional questions, and these questions are something that we'll definitely touch upon later on. So I'll just leave it at this for the start.
Okay, thank you. I will skip for a moment Gretchen and turn to Srđan. If you would like to add your perspective on what does this protracted government formation might actually mean for Bosnia, if it happens that we don't see the government formed in due time. How do you see this process developing from your perspective?
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. Let me just reflect a little bit what Darko said. My take is that basically we haven't seen much things changed as a result of elections. But what has changed, as Darko said, the context. And Bosnia is facing a real constitutional crisis, since there is no provisions on how to establish or how to form a House of People in Federation, and without having formed a House of People in Federation, it's not possible to form a House of People at the state level. So basically what I expect to see over the next period the next few months is a prolonged period of crisis. And even when government is formed, I would say that we can not expect government to be really functional, judging from what we have seen over the last mandate in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Just to mention an example of dysfunctionality, as you know, Bosnia and Herzegovina is potential candidate for membership in the European Union. And for almost 2 years now, Bosnia and Herzegovina is struggling to answer the questionnaire sent by EU as a part of the process of the integration. And just as an example, I can say that, for example, Serbia did that job in just 45 days. So that's a really good illustration how dysfunctional government structures are in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And in order to answer Tanya's question, I believe that it is important to have in mind interests of the current political elite in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And you know that in Bosnia and Herzegovina the ethnopolitics is the only game in town. And in that context, I do believe that interest of the political elite, or better to say political leaders, having in mind the non-democratic nature of political parties and things like that, I believe that their main or key interest is to maintain status quo. Only with status quo they can maintain their control over the budget, over the public resources, over the public companies, over the distribution of the job in public sector. Basically, in current system, they do have unlimited power. Option B, escalation of the crisis, for them would come with a lot of uncertainties, since they cannot predict how situation would unfold. In that case, they cannot predict what would be reaction from the side of international community, what would be reaction from the neighboring country. So that's, in my view, is not the really good option for them. Even worse option for them would be significant progress in implementing reforms. I believe that they really learned the lessons from neighboring Croatia and Romania during their part towards the EU with strengthening rule of law. Strengthening rule of law would endanger themselves, because it would be logical to expect them to be prosecuted for the corruption cases they did during their mandate. So to answer your question, I would say we will have prolonged period of crisis with very uncertain situation in terms of forming government, and I do not believe that we can expect significant progress in terms of moving forward towards the EU during this mandate.
Okay, Gretchen, we've heard some concerning possibilities. Looking at it from your perspective, from democracy development perspective, is there concern that what little progress Bosnia has been able to make is now in danger because of this delayed government formation, or if the government is formed without the democratic vision for the progress of the country?
Interesting question, Tanya. And first, let me start by saying thank you to Ned for having this event and how important it is to continue to keep shining a light on the Western Balkans in particular.
Is it on? It's a little bit delayed, maybe.
It's on.
Can you hear me? Okay, thanks. And so thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Balkans. I think I would maybe take a little bit of a different tone here. And first, with the elections, we are, of course, waiting to see the results of ODIHR's comprehensive report with recommendations for improvements and steps forward. We were most concerned about what we saw in the pre-election environment with reports of allegations along campaign efforts, and they were the highest number of reports of violations ever in the history of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and so that was very concerning. But in general, we do consider the outcome of the elections free and fair, and by and large following election laws and regulations. In terms of the democratic development progress of the country, there are real concerns, and both Darko and Srđan outlined great complexities around the political environment and changes that need to be addressed between the very complicated political system in the country if the country is going to move forward significantly. A second real challenge is the out-migration of youth, and this is a serious, serious cause for concern. And unless the elected leaders of the country can really put forth a vision for the country and a way forward, the progress that the citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina want to see, there is going to be a real problem, and there won't be a way out of this. And so the burden really falls upon the elected leaders of the country to be strong, to make some difficult choices, and to put the will of their constituents, the citizens who elected them, forward so that Bosnia and Herzegovina can continue on their path toward EU integration.
Thank you. Darko, I don't know how often do you get this question when you travel to Brussels or Washington, but what can we as the international community do to, in a way, create better conditions for Bosnia's progress? Is the reform agenda that is now coming to its end, actually, it's expiring any month now, sufficient to jumpstart the progress that Bosnia is?
I get that question all the time. It's not the first time. Actually, looking back at like, you know, the 19th and everything, and I think that actually, and we can all agree on the fact that, like, you know, it was the international community saving Bosnia despite of its neighbors and everything around and inside the country. And I think it is the time, it is the crucial time to kind of, like, you know, power it up again and save it again, because, like, you know, at this moment it's a very troublesome moment for Bosnia. On one side, like, you know, this constitutional crisis didn't come as a result of an administrative appeal. It's a very political issue, like, you know, and unless we solve the issue of how the government is going to be governed and how the total composition of the government in terms of representation will be made, we will not move forward. Which means that I'm not inviting anybody to engage in another big series of constitutional talks in Bosnia. Like, let's be clear on that. Like, I don't think that Bosnia has the capacity to make any significant constitutional reforms at this point. So, like, you know, but there it is a political outline of the problem that's actually now blocking the situation in the country. So there needs to be a firm approach by the international community that, like, you know, the agendas like election system reform, like socio-economic reforms that were started in a way by the reform agenda, other potentially positive reforms that are out there are the game in town, like, you know, and that actually there needs to be a shift of attention from the government to the issues that are actually out there. Like, you know, look, we have reformed the tax system, we have reformed the military. All that was made by the institutions of Bosnia as they are now, like, you know, and there is a capacity to make decisions. It's just that, like, you know, we have been in this whirlwind of like, you know, everybody saying how it is a non-sustainable system, and, like, you know, that no decisions can be made. We have come to the point where actually we cannot form the government within the current system, like, you know, and we could. So basically, I think that there needs to be a reassurance by the international community that, like, you know, Bosnia, like, needs to move on and needs to move forward, and that, like, you know, there are some positive things. The problem is that our reactions haven't been positive. Like, look, we have been given the reform agenda in a way that we said, okay, we're going to do this. Nobody pressured us on any of the measures in the reform agenda. Our government made the agenda themselves, and then they implemented, like, what, 50% of everything they said. Like if everything they said that they're going to implement. Like, you know, we've been now offered, like, you know, the road to NATO through MEP. You know, I think that we will be potentially declining it, like, you know, given the current constitution of the presidency. So, like, you know, there are positive efforts, there are positive signs. Like, you know, I just think that, you know, there needs to be a clear reassurance of the fact that, like, you know, Bosnia is a country that will survive and that will continue to go on. Like, you know, we have a constant diplomatic pressure, like, you know, in Bosnia, like, you know, there are debates in the EU on the future of Bosnia. There are clear. There's a clear constant pressure on Bosnia. It needs to stop. We need to be able to do things on our own, and we need to start making decisions. So, like, you know, it is a very crucial moment where it has to be reinforced by the international community, definitely.
Okay, Srđan wanted to offer.
Yeah,
yes.
I would like, since that's my favorite question, I would like to add just a few things. I would agree with Darko that it's not right time to do constitutional reforms, but I believe that as a first step, we should try to reform patronage political system in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and should be focused on rule of law, should be focused on public administration reform. I mean, without rule of law in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we really cannot expect any other reforms to happen. And what is encouraging thing, earlier this year, I think in February, EU adopted new strategy on Balkans. And in that strategy, they recognized what is the biggest issue for all Balkans countries, recognized the phenomenon of state capture as the most important problem for all Balkan countries. And what is more, they actually plan to have like 6 flagship initiatives in order to help or to move forward Balkan countries. One of them, and the first of them actually, is the rule of law. I believe that is very important to support judicial reform in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So far, we haven't seen many cases of political corruption that are persecuted before the courts in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So that's the really important thing. And also public administration reform. In order to reform this patronage clientelistic system, we need really to reform public administration, because the political parties using distribution of jobs in public administration as a way to attract voters. And Bosnia and Herzegovina has one of the biggest public sector in the world, and that's the basically working only in the interest of the current political elite or ruling parties.
Thank you, Srđan. Gretchen, maybe this brings me to the question for you. How do you see the role of the United States in supporting some of these reform initiatives? And especially, I'd like to know what is your opinion of the US and the EU cooperation when it comes to Bosnia?
Sure, thank you. Well, of course, the reform initiatives, we have the Dayton Peace Accords, which ended this horrific war and involved the different ethnic entities coming together to bring a solution to that. Probably a second reform initiative you might refer to is the 2006 April package of reforms, which interestingly came very close to passing and includes the same political leadership that we have in the country now. So I think that's a very interesting angle, and perhaps a portend that maybe compromise is possible. But additionally to that, I would say our work with the EU is in lockstep. And so we are very, very coordinated on our approach to the situation in the country and work very closely on a number of issues. There was the 2015-2018 EU reform package, which you both referenced. And it highlights very closely the interventions that USAID was able to make along some of those reform efforts, including significant work on implementation of legal reform around taxes, some very interesting interventions in the Republika Srpska about the financial accountability of the health sector, which is making a real tangible difference in the lives of the people of Republika Srpska. And so we do work very, very closely with our EU counterparts on all of these efforts. And I'm glad Srđan highlighted too the EU's Balkan strategy, because it really shows that the international community is increasing their focus on the Western Balkans, and this is vitally important, particularly at this time. Darko mentioned NATO, and we are, of course, very strongly supporting the full participation of Bosnia and Herzegovina into NATO. And so this is a very, very important effort of us, and again, working very closely with the EU to make sure that our activities complement the continued movement toward EU integration for the country.
I want to go back to something that all three of you have referenced, and that is the constitutional reform. And I understand that it might not be the right time, according to Darko or Srdjan. But Gretchen, would you, in the position where you're at, do you sense any appetite in Brussels or in Washington for a similar attempt, or any other initiative that would maybe jumpstart some of this processes forward?
Sure. Well, I can't really comment on Brussels, but for the United States, we are there to support and guide and provide as much advice as we can for this process. But at the end of the day, Bosnia and Herzegovina is a developed country, and the burden is on the current leadership of the country to make these reforms happen. And so I think the perspective now is they really have got to take the lead. We are there to support. We have a wide variety of programs on democracy and governance and economic growth, and indeed there is great progress in these sectors, great progress in the economy, the tourism industry, NATO, et cetera. But really, the burden now is on elected leaders to make this happen.
Darko, you were saying that there is sufficient pressure, if you will, from the international community, and but do you sense the pressure coming from within, from the Bosnian citizens? Do you think that what organizations like Why Not and Transparency International and our other grantees in Bosnia are doing is sufficient for democratic breakthrough in the country, or there is something else that should happen?
I mean, it is the time after the elections now, so the time for the pressure is kind of going down at the moment. But there is to be expected the democratic process of the formation of the government and then it actually working. First of all, I don't see the international community as pressuring at the moment. I see it more like supporting, and in general that is the attitude at the moment. And I think that actually the international community is generally, both the EU and the US are more listening to the situation on the ground and trying to do their best to help and assist. On the other hand, there are different movements that are kind of beacons of light in the whole situation. I would not say necessarily that there is enough strength on the ground to be able to influence political decisions and make significant changes, because look, there has even when you look into the political parties in Bosnia, there has never been a party that won more than 18% of votes in the whole country. So it's really hard to exert influence within a system like that. But in general, there are movements that are driving the situation. The results of the elections, even though we might feel again the old parties have won, but if you look, if you compare the election cycles and if you look into how much the government parties usually get compared to the last elections, there's always a swing vote of between 15 to 25% of votes in the country. That is in any country that's not governed, that doesn't have a system like Bosnia, that's enough for a sustainable change of government. In Bosnia it is not, because of the makeup of the system and because of the so many different players being involved in the whole process. So that's hard, but things are changing. The pre-election discourses are shifting in a way. The worrisome part of it is that it's not just the EU and the US that are representing the international communities in Bosnia. There's more and more influence by other players. Obviously Russia has been increasing their interest in Bosnia. Turkey has constantly been a big player in Bosnia. Recently, China is becoming a very significant player in the country. So these are all things to consider when you look into what the civil society, and then you come up with being a civil society actor on the ground that's kind of trying to fit the place. And we are trying our best. I think that finally it is time for us also to be the civil society and actually to become the counterparts of the government, because so far it's been us doing things, working on issues, getting the societies ready for stuff, and then in the crucial moments we are we've been taken off the table, and it's just usually the international community and the the local leaders at the tables. I think that it is a time for that to change, and it is a time for us to engage more on that side. On the local level, I think that, like, you know, the protests in Banja Luka are definitely a thing to mention before these elections, and, like, you know, there is a perspective of civic movements in Bosnia. I'm just, you know, like, my problem with all of these is the political articulation of all of that. That has lacked, like, you know, it has the level of political articulation of such a citizens and civil society need has been lacking, and that's the problem. Like, you know, why do you have a significantly numbered and significantly supported protest in Banja Luka, and then the outcome of the results is that, like, you know, now Dodik is controlling even more of Republika Srpska than he was before the elections. Like, you know, what's with that? You know, and that we can talk about individual positive things, but, like, you know, there is no clear strategy. There's not enough solidarity. There's not enough coordination, and I think there needs to be much more coordination between both the international community and the civil society in these efforts, like, you know, as well as within civil society on the ground. And I think that's the formula. I mean, I've been repeating myself, saying this for the last at least 10 years, but, you know, we are where we are, and, like, you know, from the position that I can speak, which is my organization, we are always for that. But, like, you know, there has never been a significant push to make this a more coordinated effort by the civil society and the international community in Bosnia, unfortunately.
To follow up on what you said, Why Not has been working a lot outside of Sarajevo as well. What can we do, we as international community, to better support efforts that are happening outside the capital?
Yeah, I mean, it comes to the question of, like, you know, how potent is the society for any activities. Like, you know, everybody's telling me, I've been asked the question, like, you know, is it the youth that's kind of the better part of Bosnia? No, it's not. Like, you know, let's be clear about that. Like, you know, the youth of Bosnia has been living in a ghettoized, condensed societies for all of their life. I at least have some recollection of a different society. Like, they have none. And, like, you know, the work like working outside of the capital means actually working with the people. It's like, you know, working, and I think it's possible. I think it just needs another approach. I think, like, you know, there are many ways of doing it. You know, like, there are ways of approaching the people. There are ways of doing things outside of Sarajevo, and also there are ways of, like, you know, using the tools that we have. Like, look, at this moment, a vast majority of people in the country are on the internet, and, you know, like, a vast majority of them are on mobiles. You know, like, our data from what we do shows that, like, you know, 90% of everybody, everything we get is coming from mobile. So, like, you know, there's like a majority of the population of Bosnia is out there, is on the streets, are using their mobiles, are on the internet. So, like, either going to them and approaching them, or using the internet to getting there. And it's easier than it's ever been before. So, you know, there are options.
There are opportunities out there.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, in the interest of time, let's shift gear for a moment here, and maybe start with Srđan. Several weeks ago, we were visited by a group of journalists who came on the USAID's funded account program, and the Europe team was actually quite, not surprised, but appalled by the stories that we've heard, how difficult it is to be in this line of work, how difficult it is to be a journalist, especially in Republika Srpska. Srđane, Darko mentioned protests in Banja Luka, how the election results were not as what people had hoped for, some at least, but even though we don't have to necessarily draw a causality there, would you mind telling us a little bit more about your experience working, and what is it like to be a watchdog in the RS? Even I mentioned that you had to close down your offices, so can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, and it's, I will say probably nothing new too, but it's definitely very difficult to do watchdog activities in Bosnia and Herzegovina, being a journalist or a civil society organization. And as Ivana mentioned, we had a lot of experience with that in terms of being attacking or threatened by government structures and people or structures close to the government. There are a lot of different techniques used by a government to threaten or to intimidate civil society and journalists. And what we have seen over only this year, a few cases of even physical attacks on journalists, being beaten by unknown people. And so it's absolutely difficult to do that kind of things, as people who came from Bosnia also confirmed. But what I believe that is important, and we as in Bosnian context, big organization or established organization, trying to do basically to help smaller grassroots organization through our legal aid center, because there are a lot of examples where the organizations at local level were threatened or attacked when they are trying to monitor performance of government activities at local level. So I believe that is one of the important thing for civil society is for bigger organization is to help and empower local grassroots organization in order to be able to do their important job.
Gretchen, how do you assess the current state of civil society in Bosnia? Would you say that there is a significant lack of capacity, or can they do this on their own? Is there anything that we can do better to facilitate these partnerships or their breakthrough?
I would say there is great capacity for civil society in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I do just want to express my support for both TI and Why Not in the country, because the work that organizations like they do are so vitally important for all of us. And I'll give a short commercial break too for the USAID-sponsored Civil Society Sustainability Index, which you can find on usaid.gov. And it really outlines the capacity of civil society around the world. And indeed, civil society in Bosnia and Herzegovina scores very high. It's very capable. Of course, and Darko alluded to this, one area that is mostly lacking, and that's universal around the world, is financial sustainability. And so that's a real concern. Darko and Tanya, you also outlined the need to really ensure that civil society has a strong constituent base outside of capital cities, and that's often a very big problem. And so constituencies for civil society organizations are very important so that they really can be sustainable. So that's very key. I would turn also to the political actors as well as an area that USAID is working in. We're very pleased to work with two of the NED core institutes, IRI and NDI in country. And it's doing great work. And one area I wanted to highlight too is one of the youth programs. I think IRI is running, and it's working with young political leaders on looking at key issues of reform toward the EU and policy issues, and how that they can work together from across the political spectrum on coalitions in parliament or caucuses in parliament to really learn important and critical negotiating and compromise skills, which is sorely lacking among the mature political leadership of the country. And so that's a very important step forward. Touching on media, that work around independent media and investigative journalism, which is something we support, is very, very important to continue the watchdog role. I wanted also to refer to Darko's mention that the strong capacity of civil society in Sarajevo, they've done such great work bringing important issues forward to the government and to elected officials. But there is this second challenge then of having government take some of these issues to heart and really use these issues. And so that's going to be a real continuing challenge for us. I might add also, Darko mentioned sort of outside influence now and increasing influence from other regions of the world, and how important it is for us to address that. And at USAID, we believe the way to do that is to build strong democratic institutions, to build a free marketplace of ideas, to build transparency, to address rule of law, so that the people of Bosnia and Herzegovina understand that they have some options to make, and that the option we hope they choose is toward the EU, toward Euro-Atlantic integration, and that means rule of law and transparency and strong democratic institutions.
Okay, I want to be mindful of the time and also have audience ask you a question, but I have one more thing that is slightly controversial. But since everybody already mentioned the foreign influences, we haven't really talked about Bosnia's immediate neighbors. For example, Croatia has expressed the dissatisfaction with the results of Bosnia's presidential elections. 3 former high representatives have written a letter coming out publicly and condemning this kind of interference into the affairs of the country. Serbia is being quiet these days, but Serbia has been known as also meddling into Bosnia. How do you, maybe Darko, if you can, and everybody's welcome to comment, how do you see these regional developments? How could they affect Bosnia in both near and long term?
Yeah, I mean, when it gets to the foreign influence, there are 3 levels of it. Like, it's the same as when we are talking about Russia, China, or Turkey. Like there's first level is the political influence, and there's the obvious political influence that both Croatia and Serbia have in Bosnia. On the other hand, as you correctly mentioned, Croatia has made it their foreign policy priority, to solve in their own way the situation in Bosnia, and there has been numerous initiatives within the EU institutions, within all of their basically their foreign policy and all of their foreign policy efforts have been oriented towards Bosnia. There is not a single meeting that a Croatian politician takes anywhere outside of the country that doesn't mention Bosnia and the situation in Bosnia. And in the whole thing, nobody is actually discussing the real issue. And the real issue that started the whole thing is the ruling of the European Court of Human Rights, which actually addresses the others. And that's where the discrimination lies. Discrimination lies in me, Darko Brkan, without wanting to express my ethnic identity, which I don't. I'm not able to run for office in my country, and that's the problem. Nothing else is the problem in this country. The problem of we can debate for hours now the problem of who elects who, but the constitutional setup of Bosnia is clear, the election law is clear, the elections were free and fair to an extent that we can call them that. I would question even that, but let's call them free and fair, and we have the makeup of the presidency as it is at the moment, based on the constitution that we still uphold in the institutions, and let's not debate it. There's no question about that. And that all of the efforts are coming down to the point of one party being written into the constitution of the country, and that's the point of the initiative, in all the foreign policy initiatives Croatia has. On the other side, you're right that Serbia is a bit quiet, but the new ambassador of Serbia to Bosnia is a person from the intelligence service. I mean, there is a constant diplomatic initiative from both sides. On the other hand, and we've been monitoring that a lot, there's a lot of disinformation efforts coming from the same way that they are coming from all the other players. They are coming also. It's a regional mix-up of media. For instance, we've been running this disinformation debunking site for a year now, and we have 860 media outlets in the database. And the only way to get into the database is to do something wrong, to make a disinformation. I didn't know that there are 860 media in the country, let alone that they will end up on the list. And many of these are regional ones. I would say at least 1/3 of the media. And in order to get on it is you have to write about Bosnia. So a third of this media is from the region, not from Bosnia. So they are all. It's a mixture of influence, and the third part is not my expertise. So I'm not going to talk about the economic influence, but there are these 3 influences that are all coming from within the region. That's why we need like to balance the power with like the support of the international community, and it's really worrisome and burdensome.
Sugden, you wanted
but
to add?
to be fair towards the neighboring country and other big powers, we have to say that there are a lot of internal demand for foreign intervention and foreign meddling. Basically, each ethnic group has their own foreign policy, and trying to find sponsors either in Russia or Turkey or China or wherever. So that makes situation even more complicated, because the leadership of each ethnic group trying to to find them in order to support them in Bosnian internal affairs.
I think you're right. I think it ties back to what you said about patronage network that goes now outside of the borders of Bosnia. I will now open the floor to the audience's question. Please identify yourself and ask your questions briefly. I will pick up 3 maybe for a starter, and then we can go from there. Lady there, Paul, and the gentleman in the second.
Hi, Jennifer Watley with Street Law. Gretchen, you started by mentioning that the youth exodus is a serious problem. And Darko, you also talked a bit about the younger generation and about how they've grown up in essentially ghettoized system. One thing we haven't talked about is the influence of the education curriculum, the education ministries in shaping democratic attitudes among youth. I wondered if you could talk about that, positive and negative. And are there other entry points that you see in terms of cultivating more democratic attitudes among Bosnia's youth?
Thank you. Let's collect 2 more. Paul, please. Thank you.
Paul McCarthy with the International Republican Institute. Thanks to all the speakers, and thanks to NED for continuing to shine a light on a very important region, the Western Balkans, that is sometimes forgotten in the policy debate, so thanks. My question has to do with foreign influence, but I wanted to dig a little bit deeper, particularly given Darko's background in digital and social media. You mentioned the role of disinformation in particular. And there's a lot of talk about Russian disinformation and so forth, but I wanted to ask you, one, are you seeing disinformation from other foreign powers in the media space? You mentioned China, you mentioned Turkey, and so forth. The Gulf is another, and we at IRI are keeping an eye on the violent extremism issue and the role that the Gulf is playing in that. So if you could talk a little bit about that and go a little bit deeper into strategies to push back in the social media space in particular on this disinformation that's coming in. Thank you.
One more. Thank you.
Roy Gutman, I'm a journalist. Question: a few years ago, and maybe not that long ago at all, there was a threat or fear that Republika Srpska might secede. More recently, I've heard a lot of concerns out of Sarajevo that Kosovo and Serbia might have some kind of a land exchange, which would have all sorts of implications for Bosnia's future. Are these serious threats today, and have they? Do they have the effect of concentrating the minds of the politicians in any way?
Thank you very much. I think we can answer these 3 questions and then maybe pick another round. Gretchen, would you like to start with the potential of working on educational reform or curricula?
Absolutely, and there is so much potential there. I'm glad you raised it. You know, as an American and our history, to go to Bosnia and Herzegovina and see segregation in schools is really alarming. It's I think a very sad thing that the country has never been able to resolve this issue. And that is, in my mind, raising another generation of young individuals in the country who see themselves as separate and different than others. And I think that's very sad to see. And so it's very critical to work on this issue. USAID has several programs to address ethnic integration. One is working with the religious community, with all of the religious leaders in the country, to bring young individuals from across the ethnic spectrum together so that they can just simply get to know one another and start to break down some of these divisions. And that's critically important. In the political sphere, I mentioned some of the work we do with young political leaders as well. I think that's vitally important. So those types of programs are key. There is a project called Regeneration that was completed recently that did a documentary on young people throughout the country from various ethnic backgrounds, and what this time frame has meant to them and how they see divisions among their communities and their ideas about how to solve this moving forward. These are vitally important right now in the country because another generation of young people is growing up with, again, these ideas of division, and that for the long term in the country is just, not a good way forward.
Okay, thank you. Darko, would you like to address Paul's question on,
I want to get just a thing. The problem with the whole thing is that the system institutionalizes segregation, and all the efforts are made towards that. And it's just not just always mention the two schools under one roof. It's it's that people from Eastern Bosnia are not going to go for a school trip to Sarajevo. They're going to go for a school trip to Belgrade. People from Western Herzegovina children from Western Herzegovina are not going to go to a school trip to Sarajevo. They're going to go to a school trip to Dalmatia or Zagreb. That's the point. That's the institutional way of segregating them further and further. And this needs to be addressed. And I appreciate all the individual efforts, small groups, gatherings, movies, and they're very effective on these groups. But in general, there needs to be a push towards institutionalization of different practices, and that needs to be addressed also. There needs to be advocacy efforts on that. I'm not an expert in the field. I just want to give an opinion, and unless, because there's much more resources put into segregation than there are in these efforts. On your question, it is a grave matter. Actually, we started working on it over 2 years ago. We launched the platform for debunking disinformation only a year ago because we needed a lot of process to be able to launch. And the results are even more troublesome than when we started. I told you, we never thought that there are 860 media outlets out there, and we already have them in the database. We over a span of years time, we have debunked over 3,500 articles of media disinformation of different kind. It's a huge number. And look, at this moment, 80% of everything we do in the debunking field is not our editorial decision. 80% of that is being requested by the readers. That's the level of interest. So there is a significant interest of the people. They understand the problem. They are every day we receive 10 to 15 emails, requests, whatever. We have even a form on the website where you can ask for the fact check. We cannot even work enough to address those. So there is a grave interest. The patterns, actually we're next year we're going to do a comprehensive analysis of potential in the beginning, February, March. We're going to publish a comprehensive analysis of all we've been doing in the last year. But in general, the trends are that there are all these networks. First of all, when you talk about Russia, they don't need to invest in this information. They have the public broadcaster in Republika Srpska. They have the state news agency in Republika Srpska that actually does the job. So okay, there is Sputnik, there's everything is there, all the system is there, but the main system they use is the public broadcaster together with the state news agency, and that's it. The pattern is they establish a totally anonymous, totally fake portal that's out there. Actually, it's called infosrpska.ba, and then within a matter of minutes, the thing that's published on an anonymous portal without any editorial, without the author name, gets picked up by the state news agency, and then within an hour it gets published by the public broadcaster. The same thing. I'm not going to say anything else about that. like, there are similar examples from other, like, the Turkish have their own media in Bosnia, so that's where it all runs. Like, on the Gulf, like, I would see it more as a subtle information kind of like, information system where they actually target more values and stuff. And we've seen a lot of those. Like, we've seen, articles like, I don't know, NASA scientists are saying that, like, during the holy month of holy night of Laylatul Qadr, there's no meteorites falling on Earth. Like, it's just kind of like, they're sending out messages that are like, subliminal, in a way. When you look into the on China, there's really nothing, to be honest with you. Like, on the disinformation side, we haven't been seeing any traction on that side. It's more about economic influence, like, investments and stuff like that. But there is a point that, like, for instance, when we do the monitoring of the government sessions, before 2017, almost zero. 2017, 2018, every session of the state level parliament has had at least one point on China on the agenda. So just a note to the audience. So, like, that's pretty much when it gets to foreign influence. I'll just be brief on the third question. Like, I mean, I don't see Republika Srpska secession as a realistic thing. Potentially with a new conflict, which I also see as a non-realistic thing. On the swap between Serbia and Kosovo, I don't have an opinion, but I don't think it's going to happen anyways. I don't think that both leaders or both of the governments there have any grounds in their constituency to do anything like that. But, like, let's wait and see. In Bosnia, I'm pretty confident, and for the fact what Srđan said in the beginning, I don't think it suits actually the leaders of Republika Srpska to go into succession. I think they want to play it on the edge because that's the way they keep the power.
Srđan,
if I may add on that question on secession and exchange territory, I will completely agree with Darko, and I do not believe that is a realistic option, because it's definitely not in the interest in the leadership in the Republic of Srpska to do that, because no one would support that move. Even official Belgrade, Serbian government, said many times that they wouldn't support that thing, and also I believe that the leadership of the Republic of Srpska, as Darko mentioned, I'm pretty sure that the status quo is something that is their interest, because escalating the crisis, secession, would definitely mean escalation of the crisis. And in that context, they cannot be sure how the situation will unfold and what will happen in that regard. And I don't believe that is the peaceful way for secession of Republika Srpska. And I also do not believe that the exchange of territory between Serbia and Kosovo is a realistic scenario.
We can go to another round. Rob, please, Danny, gentleman in the front, and then
There's one in the back.
back there. Okay.
Thank you very much. I'm Robert Benjamin with the National Democratic Institute, NDI. I just wanted to corroborate, if I could, on some of the media points. We've just done some public opinion research and media analysis with our civic partner CCI, which establishes a correlation between media coverage and public attitudes on areas that pertain to disinformation and public attitudes as relates to the role of international actors. And I think it's a combination both of explicit disinformation and media bias, where you see a paucity of neutral actual journalism, which is why I think journalists, and they should be, they're precious in their craft, and they really need to be supported, as you've pointed out. And when they do practice journalism, when they don't follow that business or editorial model, they come into the crosshairs of people who rely on that model of public discourse to continue their power. My question has to do with Europe. In our research, we found that the one thing that unites people across Bosnia and Herzegovina is the joint aspiration to join the European Union, more than anything else. And yet, we find that despite the EU strategy, which I agree with you, has all the right notes in terms of state capture and corruption, we find the path to Europe to be very rocky, very elongated. It's 15 years since Thessaloniki. There is no actual start to Bosnia-Herzegovina's negotiations. And when it comes to the very questions of rule of law and public administration neutrality and all of those things, elections, you find within the European Union itself an increasing challenge within the bloc in terms of upholding these principles, values, and systems. I'm curious to know whether or not you think that the European Union has an incentive structure to compel or induce political leaders to follow through on that strategy, even when you have a public that is divided but united on joining Europe.
Thank you, Rob.
I couldn't agree more with the assessment that you guys have laid out. I could have said that in 2006 when I left Bosnia. Having said that, I agree with you that it's time for Bosnians to run their own government and develop their own future. So why OHR? Is there still a role for OHR?
Would you mind just briefly introducing yourself?
Don Hayes.
Okay, thank you.
Ross Johnson, Wilson Center. Following up on the EU question, I mean, if there's any light at the end of this tunnel, it would seem to be the EU. I mean, it's impossible, at least for me, to imagine BIH as presently constructed institutionally, organizationally, as an EU member. So the question is, what happens along the way? We've got the questions finally answered. The coordination mechanism has mostly worked. But from here on out, does not the EU have enough sticks in addition to carrots to force structural institutional change, so that if you don't declare yourself one of the three, you're still a legitimate and fully empowered citizen of the country? I mean, every country that's joined the EU has probably made some changes to its constitution. Isn't this the mechanism that can force institutional changes, not some reversion to bond powers, but EU sticks? Thank you.
Okay, I think we can.
One more.
We can take one more. Yeah, right. From our very own Ivana.
Oh, there we go. Ivana again. I just wanted to make sure that we also mention the potential possibility of the revival of the NGO law in Republika Srpska. I know that Transparency International was instrumental in fending off the initial attempt, but there is increasing talk, particularly in light of the protests that I'm sure are not making the RS government too happy. So what do you, Srđan in particular, but also Darko and also Gretchen, anticipate in this sense? Is it possible that this law might see its revival with the new government forming in Republika Srpska? And in that case, what is the response?
Maybe we can start with the last question and then...
with the NGO law, yeah. There were several attempts, as Ivana pointed, in the Republic of Srpska to adopt a law on NGOs based on, let's say, a Russian model. So with that law, each and every society organization should ask prior approval from Ministry of Justice to do whatever they plan to do. And of course, we as organizations try to prevent that happening and organize coalition of the civil society organization in order to do that. And I expect that after the government is formed, that would be one of the priority for the new government, because in my understanding, ruling party in Republic of Srpska now feel that the situation is even more, it's better for them to do that. Actually, election results and what happened after elections make SNSD more powerful, and they do not feel that's in my view, they don't expect that international community will react on that. And for civil society in at least the Republic of Srpska, I would say that would be the end it wouldn't be definitely possible to work under those circumstances.
Okay. Maybe we can combine, if somebody wants to take the question, the first and the third one on the EU accession, or if you feel like...
I might just, sure, and Rob, that was such an interesting question. Thank you. And you know, I can't really address perhaps what the EU strategy is toward this with political leaders, but from a different angle, I just wanted to address how we would perceive a way to push this, and that is ensuring that the citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina understand the benefits of joining the EU. And so, for example, our work with state-level energy policy, or our work around even something as simple as poultry certification, so that farmers can actually trade with EU neighboring countries and reap the benefits of that. And that's how we would get to that, is to really try to shore up the grassroots understanding of the importance of EU integration. So yeah, and obviously that remains the focus. I believe, as I understand it, I think next year the EU is announcing sort of what the next step is on this process. And so this time is critical. Now is really when the elected leaders have a short time frame now. They need to get down to brass tacks over the next 9 months and put a plan forward so that the EU is comfortable with what they have planned.
Darko, would you like to add?
I'll take them all three a bit. Like on the question of the NGO law. I mean, I agree totally, and I want to mention that there have been tries of the similar things in both federation and state level, like to a lesser extent, but like more authority given to individuals in the government to let's say block the work of NGOs and stuff. So like it has been happening also on other levels, and it's a grave concern, and that's one of the things where actually civil society coordinates well. I mean, in the past, every past example, we've been really coming together fast and working on that. On the EU. Look, I don't think it's about, and people really do feel that they want to join the EU, and it's an overall perception. But I don't think they understand what's there, what does it actually mean, and how much and that's where I don't see there. I think that EU is giving enough incentives, like okay, what more incentive can you have than like you write up what you're gonna do and then just do it. Like there's not an easier task for anybody to do than that. Like and waiting for us for 2 years to finish up the questionnaire. But on the other hand, what I see is lacking is actually calling out the names. Like so look, I mean, everybody's declaratively pro-EU. All the party leaders are saying they are doing their best to do. But like nobody's, and we are still not progressing. So and nobody's calling out names. Why are we not doing it? Who is responsible? And who are these anti-European political forces in the country? Like that, I would love to see EU doing that. Like I would like to see them. Okay, like. It's your thing because this hasn't passed. It's your thing because this law hasn't been. It's your duty because the reform agenda didn't work. Like that's a thing that it's not. It's not about incentives. There's no more. Like I mean, EU has reached the level of incentives. It cannot go further. Like basically, do whatever you want, and we just accept you to the EU. Like that's the only thing that can be more than that. On the OHR. I'll first make a disclaimer, because I have to make a disclaimer of my own opinion on this, and then like I'll answer the question. So OHR is an integral part of the Bosnian constitution. And the reason why the system is not functioning is because OHR is not playing its role. Like, that's a fact. Why we did the defense reform, why did we do the tax reform? All the reforms were made by our institution, but with this burden of OHR changing it if we don't do it. And since the OHR is not doing it, we haven't been able to come to any decision because there's more incentive not to compromise than to compromise after the OHR has ceased using its bone power. So that's a fact. But it's a fact that we have it's been long overdue talking about this. So we are pretty clear that the situation from before 2006 is not coming back. But I'm saying that was the best period, and I have to make that disclaimer. After that, OHR as it is at the moment, is more of a mockery than an institution, and we are clear on that. So I mean, it's not performing, and at the same time, the message is coming from there. What, and it's becoming more a part of a problem, and I'll get you that. On the other hand, there's there's the part of the OHR mission that's actually ensuring the peace. So, and I don't know what to do with that. Like, I mean, the political role of OHR is obviously obsolete. The power of OHR having the mandate to ensure peace and security, I don't know about that. I mean, we might sit here, all of us, saying, okay, it's a very low chance of any conflict happening, there's a low chance of succession, whatever, but like, you know, are we sure? And who else is there to defend security and peace other than OHR at this moment, effectively and in a very short period of time? I think there's nobody. So that's just like, you know, my opinion, and I think maybe a reform of the OHR mandate or something is due, but like, you know, I don't necessarily see them like yet totally being dismantled. I don't know.
Okay. We have enough time for one final question, if there are any. If not, we can. Oh, there is one more in the back.
My name is Viola Ganger. I'm a freelance journalist and Washington editor for Just Security at NYU Law School. I was interested to hear what you, that you did address this issue of civil society trying to make better, more solid connections with people outside of the urban areas. Can you give me an example of an instance where you think that worked most effectively, where a civil society organization or a group of civil society organizations did have an impact in a rural area, and especially on public opinion in a rural area, for example? And because I was particularly interested in, you know, after all these years, the hardline political interests still seem to have the dominant effect on public opinion, despite thousands of civil society organizations that exist in Bosnia and have ostensibly been doing some kind of work, and now obviously some have been doing really good work. But why have they not been able to make more inroads outside of the cities?
Thank you for that question.
I can take it first.
Yes.
I mean, that's hard to say, and I always like feel uncomfortable talking on behalf of civil society in Bosnia, because I would rather talk like on behalf of criticizing the civil society in Bosnia. So like, you know, let me try to give the answer from my, it's easier, and like, you know, I don't like find myself being the typical representative of civil society in Bosnia, if I may say that, like from my own perspective, but I can talk about our examples. We've never, like, it's really hard, and I don't agree on the fact that there are thousands of NGOs in Bosnia. It's a small number of actually really NGOs that are doing the work and that are working on the ground. We have to understand that, like, whenever we are looking, and we've been doing that for a number of times over the years, like looking for partners in particular cities, it's really hard to not find good organizations that you can work with. In our case, we usually tend to assist and help and cooperate once things are happening. Like, you know, so for instance, there was like last year there was the Jajce thing with two schools under one roof. But like, you know, in order to help them, you just the only wrong way of doing it is actually doing and imposing yourself on them. Like, it's about asking them what they need, and actually then supporting them with assistance. Like, you know, we brought them, I don't know, music bands. We brought them like other NGOs to help them, like, you know, with resources, with finances, with, like, you know. So it's basically listening to the needs of the people who are doing something good, and that's for me the only actual real, you know, like looking for an agent to do the work in a local community that you want to be done is usually the wrong way. Like, you know, it can work in some cases where you have a bigger picture in mind, when there's a strategy of some kind to be implemented. But in generally, what we do is we listen to the situation on the ground, and these assistances are not structural. Usually, these come like, you know, ad hoc. They just kind of like, you know, happen. You go there, you devote your time, you help it, and these are the most effective. Like, you know, the example being this thing in the Jajce last year. That's the last thing I can remember. There have been many over the years, but like, you know, it's just kind of helping the people once they start moving.
Would you like to add anything?
Well put.
Well, with this, I think we can wrap up this session, and I thank you for joining us this morning. I think we can give a round of applause for our guests. Thank you for being our guest. Thank you.